and welcome back. This is episode 7 of my vlog series about creating the art for a 2D video game. And today's topic is going to be about compromises, and I'm specifically talking about the kinds of compromises that you can make to help you finish your personal project. So before we get into that topic though, I wanted to just let you know kind of what's going on in the background here. So while I'm talking, you're going to be watching a time-lapse of me drawing some castle furnishings. So if you've watched any of my other videos over the last couple of weeks, you may have seen a little bit of gameplay, and of course you've seen that our little character starts out in a castle. And at the moment that castle is super empty. There's a bed in there and a chest, and I think that's pretty much it. And so I wanted to make some more stuff to fill that space. Obviously, furniture is a pretty low priority item, so none of these things have been implemented into the game yet. But I thought I had a little extra time and it sounded like something fun to do, so I went ahead and just made these sprite sheets, and they will be implemented into the game in the future. But while you're watching me draw, I thought I would talk about a topic that will hopefully help you to finish your personal project. And much like my last video, I'm talking about any sort of artistic project. Obviously, I'm working on a video game, but this applies to a comic book, this applies to a children's book, a short animation, maybe a 2D sort of board game. This can apply to any project that you have either taken on or are thinking about taking on. And hopefully it will help you to lighten your workload a little bit and help you to actually finish the thing that you've started. So what do I mean by compromises? So I first want to make it clear that I am not talking about the kind of compromises that are going to hurt you later. The kind of compromise I'm talking about is the kind that preserves your vision for the final product. So for example, if you were building a house and you decided you wanted to save time and money and not build your house to code, that is a bad compromise. Ultimately, that is going to come back to bite you. Nobody's vision for their finished home is something that's falling apart and is liable to catch fire at any moment. That is not your vision for your home. The kind of compromise I'm talking about is the kind where, say you finish this house and you've decided you can't quite afford to put hardwood floors throughout the entire home, so you're going to put them everywhere but in the bedrooms, and the bedrooms will be carpeted. Your vision for the home is still preserved. You still have a comfortable place that you can be proud of, that you can raise your family. It just has carpet in the bedrooms, and that really doesn't bother you that much. So that is the kind of compromise that I am referring to, is the kind that preserves your vision for the final product but still allows you to finish on budget and on time. So my first question, and the question you may be asking yourself, is why compromise at all? Why not just do all the things? And the first reason is a kind of an obvious one, but most people have either a time or financial budget. Even, these great big corporations and companies that are making products, I mean, they still have time and financial budgets, and things do get cut from production. And you may be in the situation like me where this project is not costing you anything. So for example, this game that I'm working on is not costing me any money. Any money that I'm spending is money that I would be spending anyway. So yes, I do pay for Photoshop every month. I do have a subscription fee, but I would be paying that anyway. I draw on Photoshop almost every day. So that is something I am paying for regardless of whether or not I'm using it to make a game. And the same goes with all of my equipment. My Cintiq, I've had that for a couple of years, and it is something I would have bought anyway. And I did buy anyway before I ever started working on this game. But like everyone else, I do have a time budget. Obviously, we all have a finite amount of time on this earth, and every day you've got other responsibilities and other things you have to do. And most of us don't want to be tinkering away on the same project. Even though it's a lot of fun and we enjoy it, you probably don't want to be tinkering away on the same thing for the rest of your life. We'd like to, actually finish this thing and send it out into the world. And so another reason that you might want to consider some compromises is that more is not always better. Limitations are wonderful for creativity. I think I made this comparison in my last video, but there are a lot of really big budget movies out there that are visually stunning and just really lack substance. A perfect example, of course, is like the original Star Wars trilogy. Like, you would be hard-pressed to find someone who has not watched those movies. They are just embedded into our culture. But my understanding is that that first movie in particular had a really tiny budget, but they still managed to make something that basically everyone has seen and changed the world in a small way. But then, you fast forward a few years into the future and they decide they're going to make those prequels, and there's an enormous budget, and you get something like Jar Jar Binks, and I'm going to make a sweeping generalization here, but nobody likes those movies. Like, nobody. So more, like I said, is not always better. Another question you may be asking yourself is, well, what do I compromise? So if you've got this project that you're working on and are really passionate about, it may rub you the wrong way a little bit to think about having to make some concessions. You might think that, well, if I'm cutting corners, then this thing isn't going to be, what I've always dreamed it would be. So I'm hopefully going to be able to give you some ideas for things that you can do that will help you finish, help you make something that you're proud of, but can still help you actually get it done. So one of those things I touched on briefly in my last video is, of course, stylistic compromises. So if you ask yourself, really honestly, what is important to me in this project and what really isn't, some of those things that are important and not important might come down to style. So, for example, maybe if you're making a comic book, you might be really, really invested in super detailed, clean line art, but color is not as important to you. You think you could probably get away with either spot color or black and white, and it would still be the sort of beautiful book that you've dreamed of. It just might be a little easier on that time and financial budget. Another thing that you might consider is actually paying for some things. So if you have the money and don't mind, shelling out a little bit. So for example, if you were making a game like we are, you might consider, buying the music or buying some pre-made assets. You might consider, hiring a colorist or somebody to help you, design or lay out your book if that's what you're making. So if you have the money, you don't necessarily have to do the whole thing yourself, particularly, if you run a Kickstarter or something like that and are able to raise a bit of the funds. That is always an option. You do not have to do everything yourself. Just decide what the most important parts are that have to be done by you, and then if you are able to, feel free to shell out those other duties that you're not as excited about to other people. Another thing that you might consider is the final product. Do you really need to have something that you can hold in your hands? Or is your main goal just to share it with people and have them enjoy it? So, for example, this one pretty much applies to any project that you're working on, but most things can be posted online, so you don't necessarily have to have a printed book in your hands at the end of the day. If your main goal is just to share a story that you wrote or a comic that you illustrated with your friends and family and with your potential fans, you might consider just posting it online. You don't necessarily need to go through the process of having that thing printed, unless that is really your vision, is to hold this thing in your hand, at the end of the day. Same thing if you're making a game, you don't necessarily have to have a hard copy of that game. You can post it to the internet for people to download. And another thing that you can consider too is if you really do want to have that physical object in your hands when you're done with this project, what sort of concessions can you make to get that physical product actually made? So, for example, again, going back to the book example, do you really need to have a hardback book, or would a softback do? One is obviously going to be less expensive than the other. And if you do absolutely have to have a hardback full-color book that you can hold in your hands, well, is it really important to you that it's, 150 pages? Could it be 75 pages? There are always things that you can do in order to make this project happen that is more reasonable and more manageable for you. So I wanted to share some examples of some of the things that I have compromised on in order to make the art of this game that we're working on, and hopefully it will give you some ideas for things that you can do as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is our character models. So if you've played any other 2D games, I would say, in my experience, I feel like they fall into one of two categories. I feel like most 2D games are either side-scrollers, and I'm talking about Super Mario World, like for the old Super Nintendo, where you are just seeing Mario from the side, either the left or the right, and the camera just kind of follows him along as he runs. Or I feel like the other umbrella that some of these games fall under is that like 3/4 bird's eye view. It's, maybe it's directly above, or maybe the camera is positioned to where you're seeing like the front face of an object, the top and the front face. And I'm thinking kind of like a Link to the Past, like again, another 2D Super Nintendo game. And I feel like there are pros and cons to both of those styles of games. So when we're talking about like a side scroller, one of the pros of a side scroller is that you only need basically one character model and set of animations for each character. So for example, Mario in Super Mario World, we only ever see him from the side. We see him from the right side and the left side, but we're not seeing his, the top of his head. We're not seeing him from the back. We're not seeing him from beneath. We're only ever seeing that one side, and so even when you're doing the animations, we only have to do a side run animation, a side jump animation. You don't need a whole bunch of different character models and sprites in order to make, that game. But one of the cons of that style of game, of course, is that it's not really the kind of game that lends itself well to like world exploration, to big open world style games, because again, the camera only goes, left to right, and it doesn't really allow you to just move around freely. And so basically you have the opposite problem when you go into like a bird's eye type of game like A Link to the Past. So you get to see, because you're up above, you get to see the whole world, you can move in any direction. It's great for exploring type of games. But you need a lot more character models, a lot more sprites for each character. So when Link walks away, you've got to have a sprite for his back. When he walks towards you, you have a sprite for his front. You have a sprite for each side. You also have animations for each of those. So if Link is walking toward you, that's a separate animation for when he's walking away from you. And same thing, he swings his sword to the side, he swings his sword to the front, he swings his sword to the back. And you can see how if you have a game with a ton of characters, how that can get overwhelming really, really fast. So early on in this process, when we were brainstorming the ideas for this game and kind of going over what we thought our vision was for the final product, we ran into that a little bit because we wanted a large cast of characters, but we also wanted an open world kind of game. We wanted this to be the kind of game where you can just kind of wander anywhere and go exploring and go explore the other kingdoms. We didn't want it to be, limited. I really don't think for this kind of game that a side scroller would have lent itself well to this sort of experience. And so that pretty much was a given that we needed to do an up above or at least 3/4 bird's eye view of our game. The problem is we also wanted a large cast of characters, and that would be, like I said, I am one person, I am one artist, and I have other things to do, and I just, and my brother, he's working full time, and he has a family, and there's just no way that just the two of us could create probably that many character sprites and that much animation to go with them. And so early on we decided that we were going to break the rules a little bit, and each of our characters only has one character model. So if you've watched any of our gameplay demos from the last several episodes, you may have noticed that regardless of which way your character is going, you are always seeing them from the same view. You are always seeing them from it's not entirely a bird's eye view. You are up above and slightly in front. So you're seeing the top of every object and the front face. And that applies to your character, regardless of which way they are going on the screen. Now, the benefit of that is we only need one model, one sprite per character, and they only need one set of animations because you're not seeing them from different viewpoints. The downside of that, of course, is that the perspective is super wonky, and for some people and their project, that would be a huge deal breaker. Especially if they're trying to create a really immersive experience. They wouldn't want the viewer or the player or the audience to feel disconnected in that sort of way. For us, we weren't too worried about that. We figure the style of the game is it's humorous, it's cartoony. We really didn't think it was going to bother anyone too much. Which leads us, of course, to another compromise we made. So because the characters, their perspective is just kind of wonky, like I said, any way they walk on the screen, you are always seeing them from the same view. That means that our buildings and our props and our other assets are all going to be a bit wonky as well. So, for example, our buildings are always they're always in the perspective that you're seeing them from like up above 3/4. So you're seeing the top of the building and the front face, which means that your buildings and your characters are not always going to be in the same perspective, which obviously is like incorrect technically. And the way I've sort of fudged that a little bit was just to make everything a little bit wonky. So if you look at, for example, some of the furniture that I'm making here in the background, like for example the bookcase, you'll notice that the top plane of that bookcase is a perfect rectangle, which means that logically means that we are looking at that bookcase straight down. And if you look at a cube straight down, you will only see the top face of that cube. You will not see any of the side faces. So we know logically that we should not be able to see the front face of that bookshelf, but you can because it's my game and I'm the artist and I can do whatever I want. And I feel like it also really helps if everything is a little bit wonky, everything is a bit off, I feel like it sort of normalizes it in this game. Now feel free to disagree with me if you like, but basically I feel like if everything is off, then it's all correct. At least for our game, I feel like it works. So those are some of the compromises that we made. One was to do, single character sprites for all of our cast of characters, and another was just to like cheat perspective all over the place, however I wanted to, basically. And of course, I also talked about this in my last video, but another one is just stylistic compromises. I wanted our game to be colorful but still cohesive, so I really limited my color palette. Our characters are basically heads. They have little bodies, but they're not hyper detailed. There is no anatomy to speak of. They're just, they're very, very simple. And the same goes with the rest of our objects. Everything is very simple. Our animations are only, 12 frame animations. They're not like the full 24. We just have really made it simple and easy on ourselves so that we can finish something that we're proud of. And even though we've made compromises, I feel like they have in no way damaged that final vision we have for this project. Not having multiple character sprites, not having perfect perspective, in no way is going to hinder us from making something that we are proud of and that we're excited to show to people. Okay, everybody, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me for another episode of this vlog series, and I will be back again next week.